British Columbia. Father Anthony recounted the story of Mushele Harry. Mushele Harry was a trapper and something of a rarity among his fellow tribesmen. According to Father Anthony, he was tough and fearless among the tribe. Mushele Harry claimed he had been picked up and kidnapped by a Sasquatch. This is his story. The story was told to me by Father Anthony. He was a much-loved missionary priest. He had been living with the Nootka tribe. Every day, Father Anthony would ring the church bell, and the tribe would gather. Father Anthony knew everyone in the tribe well, and he was especially close to Mushele Harry. Father Anthony would recount, Mushele Harry was a tough, fearless man of excellent physique. When others in the tribe said it couldn't be done, Mushele Harry did it. In the course of his hunting and trapping, Mushele Harry would spend long weeks in the forest alone. Something the average native did not do in those days. The natives on the coast were apparently rather timid people. They seemed to regard the deep forest as the home and territory of the Sasquatch. When they would go deep into the forest for any reason, the natives never went alone. Mushele Harry was different from other natives. He went into the forest alone and feared nothing. The tribal elders gathered to speak with Mushele Harry. They knew full well what the Sasquatch were. They feared them and respected them, but they warned Mushele Harry not to go deep into the woods for fear of an attack by a Sasquatch. Unfortunately, Mushele Harry did not heed the warning. Late that autumn evening, Mushele Harry set off for the woods. With his traps, his camping gear, his plan was to set a trap line and stay in the woods for several months. He headed for his favorite hunting area. From Nootka, he paddled his own canoe to the mouth of the Canoma. There he placed his canoe and headed upstream on foot. Approximately 12 miles upstream, he made his base camp, after building himself a lean-to. After spending a few nights in his camp spot, Mushele Harry was very happy with his location. One night, wrapped in his blankets and only in his underwear, he was suddenly picked up by a huge male Sasquatch. He was not carried off very far, probably a distance of 2 or 3 miles. When daylight came, he was able to see he was in some sort of camp, under a high rock shelf, and surrounded by some 20 Sasquatches. They were all different sexes and sizes. For some time, they stood around him and stared at him. The males in the front were the curious group, the females behind them, and then the young ones directly to the rear. Mushele Harry was frightened. As he looked around, he saw a large number of bones lying around the campsite. When he saw this, he was convinced the Sasquatch were going to eat him. The Sasquatch did not harm him in any way. Occasionally one would come forward and touch him, and when they discovered that his skin was loose, in fact it was his woven underwear, several came forward and pulled on it gently. While they looked at him and examined him, Mushele Harry sat on his back to the rock wall and did not move. He was cold and he was hungry, and his only thoughts were of escape. Sometime late in the afternoon, curiosity by the Sasquatch for Harry seemed to diminish. And with most of the Sasquatch out of the camp, there came the opportunity that he needed. He leaped to his feet and ran for his life, never looking back. Mouchelet Harry ran and ran. He ran toward where he had guessed the river to be, and sure enough, he soon came to his campsite. In what must have been a blind panic, he bypassed his camp and ran the 12 miles to his canoe that was at the mouth of the Canoma. Father Anthony describes the story of Mouchelet Harry arriving at Nuka. He says as follows: "It was probably 3 o'clock in the morning. He and his brother were asleep, and the village was quiet. Suddenly, there was a series of wild cries from the water of the inlet. Lights were lit, and he and the others hurried down to the water's edge. There, nearly frozen and exhausted in his canoe, lay Mouchelet Harry. He was barefoot and only wearing his wet, torn underwear. He had paddled his canoe through the cold night 45 miles from the mouth of the Canoma River. Father Anthony and his companions carried the almost lifeless form up from the water's edge. It took several weeks to nurse Mouchelet Harry back to sanity and good health. Father Anthony would state, Mouchelet Harry hardly ate. He rambled, and most of the time when he was awake, he wept. During the course of these 3 weeks, Harry's hair turned pure white. The story of the kidnapping came out slowly. At first, Mouchelet Harry would talk to no one. Then he told Father Anthony what happened, and later, others. When Mouchelet Harry fully recovered, he was asked if he had planned to go back to get his belongings, the camp equipment, the pots and pans, the trap line, the rifle, his lean-to, everything that he had left behind. In 1928, the rifle alone would be regarded as a highly prized possession. But Mouchelet Harry never went back to the Canoma. Not only did he never return there, according to Father Anthony, he never left the settlement at Nuka. He never went into the woods again for the rest of his life. He preferred to lose everything of value than risk another encounter with a Sasquatch. They say once you take a man's spirit, there's nothing left. Mouchelet Harry loved the woods, loved the outdoors, loved hunting, loved life. That was taken away the day he was kidnapped by a Sasquatch. Some say overnight he became an old man. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you this evening. I hope you enjoyed the retelling of Mouchelet Harry. Very fascinating encounter of a man that was so scared his hair turned white and he became an old man overnight. A very sad story, but very fascinating tale. You know, as I was reading that story, it made me wonder if, as with any primates, there's kind of a higher order. Makes you wonder if the one that kidnapped Mouchelet Harry was kind of in charge. And the Sasquatch didn't really harm Mouchelet Harry, but he didn't stick around long enough to find out if they were going to harm him or not. He took off running. Fascinating story. Welcome to the show. Remember, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Tonight's an interesting night. I want to welcome Cora to the show. Cora, thanks for being here tonight.
No problem. I'm excited.
And if you would, you had a very interesting encounter, kind of a scary encounter. Before you jump into the encounter, prior to you guys actually seeing anything come up to the window, And I know we're going to get into that. Was there anything strange that was going on and around the property during that time?
Yes, it was winter time, and we would get, like windy nights in the mountains, things like that. But more than just the wind, we would hear like slaps on the side of the house, and you knew it was a slap because you could tell the difference between what a rock sounds like hitting siding versus, like a hand hitting the side of the house. And this is something that, kind of alluded me to like the feeling of being watched was if you were outside at night, you kind of got the feeling that you weren't alone. And we had bears, I've seen bobcats, things like that, but it just wasn't the same feeling. It was like just that internal feeling of like panic almost. And so we had that happen. And that same winter, and in the fall, I had he was 4 years old at the time. He was my little brother, and he would repeatedly tell my mom and dad that he would see monsters in his windows looking at him. And my mom and dad were like, "Oh, bad dream, go back to bed, you're fine," that kind of thing. And after, I had my experience, I really took it a lot more seriously.
I can imagine. Well, tell us about your experience. What were you guys doing? And walk us right into everything that you saw and experienced. And if you would, just be as detailed as you can.
Yeah. Well, in the beginning of the evening, I'll just, it was my 16th birthday. It was December the 22nd going on to the 23rd. And I had a bunch of girls who were, 15, 16, 17, arriving for a slumber party. And, we were having like lighthearted fun. We were in the basement. I don't know how to describe this. I guess you could say that the house had a walkout basement that was finished. And so that's where my room was. It was downstairs. But we were in the basement just hanging out, having a good time, a bunch of teenage girls being noisy, watching movies, just having fun. And so I would say it was around like probably close to midnight that, we all kind of hunkered down and went to bed. And let's see here. I had 4 girls stay in the guest room beside mine. But that room actually had like blackout stains. And then me and my best friend, we stayed in my room. And my room, if I can describe it for you, it was a 12 foot by 18 foot room. My parents built it for me. They built the house this summer, and they built it specifically for me. And I was like, I want the biggest room I can have with lots of windows. And my room was lime green with these curtains. They were kind of like shears, but you could see directly through them, and I always, kept them open all the time. And my bed was the room was kind of rectangular, and my bed was on one wall, and it faced this double window. And normally I can describe this window as if it was like French doors, but they weren't doors, and so it was really, really big. That's where my best friend and I were sleeping, and so I want to say it was probably close to like 2, maybe 2:30 in the morning. I'm feeling my best friend shake me awake. And she's like, you got to get up. You got to wake up. And I'm like, well, you leave me alone. I'm sleeping. And those that know me know that I do not like to be disturbed in my sleep. I am a bear, kind of, if you wake me up. And so I was getting a little grumpy with her. I was like, stop, leave me alone. And her voice was just like terror. And the second time that she was like, please wake up. She was like, something is staring at us in your bedroom window right across from us. And I was like, what? And so I'm, rubbing my eyes, not really taking her seriously, but at the same time, like, okay, she's actually scared. And once I kind of clear my eyes up enough, I see something that is what I can tell is kind of crouched, has its hands up by its face, and it's looking in on us. And it honestly, like, gives me chills, kind of freaks me out to just, like, think back on that moment and describe it to you, because it is just like, it's terrifying. And it's just like, I'm, laying there kind of half sitting up. And just to give you a little more detail, my bed had a canopy over it, like the netting type. And it was a big iron bed. And so I was up high, I could kind of like, I wouldn't say it was eye level or anything. I was definitely like, if I looked straight ahead, I could see what I would assume to be its like stomach. And so, you know, I was sitting halfway up, looking up at it. It was crouching in and had its arms and its hands up by my face. And I just like froze. My mouth was like slightly open. I remember thinking like, what do I do? Do I call my dad? Do I run out of the room? If I move, is it going to come in here and get me? It was so big that, I mean, I didn't know if I was dreaming, but what I did know was that something was not right. And I was Daddy's girl. So my cell phone was beside me in bed, and I picked it up, and that at that point would have been the only light in the room. So I'm assuming they must have good eyesight at night. And before I get into that, let me just kind of describe to you the actual thing that I was doing. I kind of skipped over that, but like I said, crouched down, hands up beside the face, like kind of like peeking in. I could tell it was crouched because when it was done looking at us, it stood up more and its hands went down by its side. And so, it's crouched in looking, and I could tell it was definitely covered in hair. That night the moon was out, and I can't remember if it was a half moon or a full moon, but I do remember being able to see like the moonlight behind it, and I could tell that it had hair because it was kind of shiny looking. I could see somewhat of a detail in the hands once it dropped it down. Once it dropped its arms down by its side, they're like leathery looking. I did not see the face, and sometimes I think about that, and I wish I had seen more detail, but at the same time, I feel kind of fortunate not to because I'm already really freaked out. Just in thinking back on it, I cannot think of what else I would think, like how I would cope with that. So, definitely could see hair. And if I could give you a color for the hair, it would definitely be like black. That was what I saw. Wasn't brown, wasn't red, it was definitely like a blackish color with a little bit of shine to it from the moon. And then behind where it was, we had a wooden playground. I want to say the playground was probably around 5 feet from my window. And the playground, let's see here, I'm thinking the playground was probably around 6.5 feet. It was built for my little brothers. And when it fully stood up, I know it was, up near my window, but when we thought walking away, it was definitely taller than the playground. And so I'm sorry if I'm going out of order. I'm just so nervous. It's like killing to rethink about this staring in on me. But anyway, so at this point, I'm halfway sitting up in my bed, and I'm watching it crouch down, looking in on me. I picked up my phone, and I called my dad. And I'm trying to be quiet because I'm terrified that this thing is going to come in here, and I don't want to move. And I say, Dad, there is something really big staring at us. And he was like, what? And I said, there's something really big, and it's looking at us. I was like, can you please come down here, or please go outside, or just do something? And he was like, okay, all right, calm down. And so my dad's bedroom was above mine, and I could hear my dad, his feet hit the floor, and as soon as his feet hit the floor, it knew. I don't know how it knew, but it knew, and it was really graceful in its movement, but it took its arms down its hands down from its face, put it down by its side, and turned to its right, and just walked away, just straight back. And all that was behind our house was tree line, thick forest. We lived just on the end of the national forest in Southwest Virginia. So I'm assuming that's where it went. And what really another reason I know what I saw was a Sasquatch was because our property went back a few acres, but our fence line for our yard only went back maybe 30 feet, just because after that you couldn't really be in that area because it was downhill, it was rocky, there was a wooded area, and it went down into a creek. So why would anybody be back there? Why? I mean, there's no reason for that. So it walks away. When I think about it walking away, and when I think about it going, these are two things I remember. I remember it starting to walk away, and it's probably a little bit past the playground now, and Hannah and I just bolted out of the room, and we ran upstairs, and we were freaking out. We went upstairs, And that was it. I don't, after that, I'm like kind of, and everything's kind of fuzzy. I honestly think I was kind of in shock, but my dad is, outside on the deck, and the deck is on the top second floor with him. He's outside on the deck, and he had one of those, I don't know what you guys call them, but they're really big flashlights, and they can shine like really, really far away. I don't know what they're called, but they're just really big.
Like a big mag light?
Yeah. It's just like really round and really big and kind of bulky, like if you pick it up. He was shining that outside, and he was yelling and, like trying to figure out who was out there, because, I'm still thinking like, who would be out there? My dad is telling me that he's going to call the police and he's going to file a report, and he's starting to ask me questions like, well, how tall is this? And he said it was big, and, was it a boy or a girl, and just things like that. And, my friend is just being totally silent. She's really freaked out. She's not saying anything, won't respond to any of his questions. And I told my dad, I was like, Dad, I said, I don't know if it was a guy or a girl. I was like, but I'm honestly not even sure if like what I saw was like human, because it was so big. And the way that I described it to my dad was, I said, if you take the single wide refrigerator that's in the garage, and I said, but you put two of them side by side, I said, that's how wide what I saw was. And we went, my dad had to convince me to go back downstairs to my room and show me like how tall it was in the window. I didn't want to go downstairs. I didn't want to be near any of the windows. We went downstairs, and I told him, I was like, well, it was crouched when it was looking at us. And, by the time I called you and it was, trying to get away, I said it had already stood up, and it was taller than the window. And I was describing that to him, and he was really puzzled, and he said, are you sure that, you guys weren't dreaming, or are you sure, that you just maybe saw a bear, or, are you sure it wasn't a person? And he's really starting to question the answers that I'm giving him, because I honestly think he couldn't figure it out himself. I was like, no, Dad, I know what I saw. And the only time that my friend spoke up was when she said, that's what we saw. That's how big it was. That's it.
Yeah, that's a scary encounter. Happy Sweet 16, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating encounter. It's interesting. You use a lot of terms like hands. You don't say paws. You use hands or hair instead of fur. And I've heard of encounters like this, too, before. I actually had an encounter. I'm trying to remember, Cora. It was, I want to say it was Virginia, too, as well. But it was a woman, and her son would say, a monster comes up to the window at night. Well, everyone thought the kid was full of crap until the mom was sitting there one night. She turns around, and there's a monster in the window looking at her. Did you ever ask your brother anymore about, I realize he's 4 years old, but did you ever stop and go, hey, tell me what you saw? Tell me exactly about this monster.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. After I had my encounter, I didn't really think about him saying that he'd seen monsters in his window until the next time that he had done it. And I was like, oh my gosh, what if the same thing is happening to him? And one night he had what my parents said was a bad dream, and he said there was a monster in the window again. And you could tell if he was having a bad dream, because the ceilings were vaulted on the top floor. And let me just describe the house to you really quick. So our house was built on a sloping hill. So if you were on the first floor, you could, there was like a porch and everything, and then it dropped down a level, and that's how we had the walkout basement, because it was on a slope. And so his room was on the front end of the house. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night and have a nightmare, and you could just hear him screaming his head off. And it would worry me so much. I would go up there, and I would check on him, and usually by the time I would get up there, my parents would be in there already holding him, telling him it's okay. And this one night, the same thing happened, and I didn't sleep very much after that. I did get blackout curtains, and but I still felt weird, and so I was already awake. Went upstairs, and I go in there, and my mom is holding him, and he says, I said, what's wrong, buddy? And he said, Sissy, there was a monster in my window again. And I said, well, what was it doing? And he said, it was just looking at me. It was just looking at me and moving its head a little bit back and forth. And I started to ask him questions like, well, did you notice anything about it? Like, what kind of monster was it? And he said it was a hairy monster. This was just a few weeks after I had what had happened to me. And I told my mom and my dad, I said, I know you guys are, a little wary of what happened. And I said, and it was definitely a real thing for me, and it is a real thing. I said, but I think the same thing is happening to him, and we have got to either get him some curtains. He can't sleep in here. I was trying to come up with solutions. And if I ask him about it now, he doesn't remember anything. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But I do remember, just waking up sometimes and having a bad nightmare, and I'm glad he doesn't remember that.
I would imagine he's several years older now, and doesn't quite remember any of that. But that's a fascinating encounter. It makes you wonder why it was coming up to the window. Did you get the impression there was any ill intent? Or did you get the impression like it was just curious, bunch of girls down there? What was your general impression of it looking in?
I think it may have just been curious that night, but, we had other really strange things happen around the property that I would consider not to necessarily be aggressive toward us, but maybe just territorial. I haven't gotten to share this one with you, but one morning my mom took us to school, and it was a really, really foggy, rainy morning, and you couldn't really see that far ahead of you, especially when you live in the mountains. And so she came back home, and she was by herself, and parked in the driveway and went up to the front door. And right in front of the steps to get onto the porch up to the front door was a huge pile of scat. My mom just like, I never got to see it. My dad came home and cleaned it up, but it was so huge. My mom was so freaked out. She's like, this has got to be the biggest bear that I think has ever lived. She called my dad. My dad came home from work. She's like, can you come clean this up? I'm really freaked out. And my dad comes home to clean it up, and he looks at it, and he tells my mom, he says, honey, that's not bear scat. And, I don't know what kind of conversation they had after that. I just know my dad told my mom that it wasn't bear scat. He didn't know what it was, but, he was really freaked out by that because I've never seen anything like that before, but, I guess you can kind of tell when something is bear scat and when it's not, but they just said it was the biggest pile, and that seems a little territorial to me, but the slaps on the house, they were always really close to my room. Like, I lived on the corner of the house, and so my room, the outer wall was outside, and that was the wall that always got slapped. I hate that feeling of just feeling like something is on the other side of the wall, even though you can't see it, you just feel it, and then you would hear the slap on the side of the house. But other than that, I don't think we ever had anything like aggressive happen. We did have, trash cans messed with a few times, things thrown around in the yard, but my parents always attributed it to bears. But, when you see a Sasquatch in your window, you kind of have Sasquatch on the brain all the time. You're like, nope, that's not what that was. That's not a bear.
Yeah, I would imagine too, and you saw it come up to the door. And so when you hear slaps on the wall, you kind of already know what's going on. Did you ever talk to your folks and tell them about what you thought it was, or did you know at that time?
Oh, I definitely talked to my mom and dad. You flip channels on TV, and sometimes you come across things, and I've done a little research on the internet, and just from the size of it and the hair, you hear about Sasquatch as a kid, and somebody's like, ooh, Sasquatch, those kinds of things, and you don't really think it's a real thing until you see one. And then after that, for me anyway, I wanted to know more. I wanted to know what I saw, and that's definitely, I know what I saw. I can't think of anything else that would be out in below 30-degree weather, outside, looking in on me, that was huge, that would have, like slapping on the side of the house. And one other thing that we repeatedly had happen was we would let the dogs out, and if there was a bear outside, they would just growl at it or, kind of bark at it a little bit, and the bear would pay no attention to them. It was so weird. You could actually yell at the bear if it was in the driveway, and it would go back up the driveway. But if you let the dogs out, sometimes we'd let the dogs out. They would cry and whimper and just beg to come back in, and we would let them in. But we wanted to know what was out there, and so we would all go up to the deck and just like, oh my goodness, is there a bear out here? We wanted to see it, and this actually happened before I actually had the encounter, and a lot afterward too. But we would hear footsteps in the tree line behind the house, just like walking, and you could tell they were bipedal. You could tell it wasn't a creature with four legs. You could definitely tell it was. We always thought it was a person walking around, and so I think that's why my dad kind of took me a little seriously at first when I was like, Dad, there's somebody looking at us, until I told him the size, because we had thought sometimes that there was somebody out walking around back at the house, but it was weird because it was out in the middle of nowhere.
It's a terrifying encounter, and I think you do a great job with your description. I think for people listening, I mean, you kind of nailed it right there with the refrigerator. You put two refrigerators side by side, and that's kind of the length of their shoulders. I mean, they're huge. These things are huge. Not all of them, but I would say 90% of encounters, people describe them as being huge. Just huge, huge creatures.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think in your situation, it might have been just interested. Probably heard you guys all night long, wanted to come up and see what was going on. My fear is with your little brother. I hate hearing stuff like that when these things come up to the windows and there's little kids in the room. What is the intention there? If it was, most people say, well, they're probably just curious and they see him as a non-threat. Well, let's say a grizzly bear was coming up to the window and it only focused on the 4-year-old little boy. Do you think it's still just curiosity, or do you think there's something else going on there? We just don't know their intentions, and it always bothers me when I hear that, them coming up to the windows. I think in your guys' case, with your Sweet 16, it was a bunch of girls. It probably heard you guys all night long. And they do have great hearing. I mean, your dad dropping his feet down and probably on his way downstairs was enough for it to realize it's time to go and leave. And that just kind of shows the intelligence of these things,
Yeah, in thinking back, I mean, we were a very, very noisy family. I mean, 5 kids, 3 dogs, 2 adults, and I'm sure we were always very interesting to look at, but especially with my brothers, it really does freak me out to think that something was just sitting there thinking of what it could do, to be 4 years old and run to your parents' room and have them say, oh, it's a bad dream, when it's not. That's just like them saying, honey, are you sure that's what you saw? And I'm just thankful he doesn't remember it.
Yeah, no kidding. Do you ever talk to your parents now? Do you ever go back and talk to your parents and say, hey, look?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think they believe me now, especially as we moved in 2008 after the house was built, and it was built during the summer, and then they moved out in 2012 just to be closer to their parents. But they, I do talk about it from time to time. They know that I do like to look into this subject and learn more about it, and I am a little obsessed with it, but I definitely wasn't before the experience. I probably, in my mind, if Sasquatch was real when I was 16 years old, if I had thought about it, I'd be like, oh, I am the least likely to see Sasquatch. I'm a cheerleader. I'm girly. I don't like to be outside. Like, what are you talking about? But, now it's definitely something that is a part of my life. But I will say I would never want to go look for one. I would never want to see one again, ever. Just because it was that terrifying to me to wake up and see that. I'm just interested in, learning more about them and figuring out what they are. But my parents, they know I'm going to share my experience. And my dad was like, I'm proud of you for, stepping out and just, sharing what happened. And he said, we do believe you now, and we're sorry we didn't at the time. But and this was another thing I hadn't gotten to tell you, but I had read the Missing 411 books, or kind of pieces of them. I've kind of flipped through them, but and I was telling my mom about them, and she just had this weird look on her face, and I said, what's up? And she said, did you know that you had a great aunt and a great uncle that went missing out west in one of the national forests over there? And she said, and when the family tried to look into it and, get things together, they had no record of anything. There was no search party. There wasn't anything. They just vanished. And that really freaks me out. And then my grandfather my grandfather totally believes me because he had his own experiences living on a mountain about, I want to say 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes away from me in the opposite direction. But he was born in 1941, and I would say, I think it was 1957 or 1958, and it snowed. And when it snowed, if you were on the mountain, if you had to get up there, you couldn't drive up there. You had to park at the bottom and walk up. And it's not a huge mountain, and so it was okay, but it was dark. And so one night he had to walk up the mountain as a teenager, and he said that something paralleled him all the way up to the house. And he said, no cell phones or anything, so he was completely by himself. But he said when he stopped, it would stop. And he said it always stayed right inside the tree line. And he said, he was so scared to run. And at first he thought it was a big cat right beside him until he noticed that the footsteps were just like his, 2 footsteps. And so family's definitely a little more supportive of me now. I mean, we do get the people that come in and are absolutely crazy, but I think when you've seen a Sasquatch and you know what you've seen, it doesn't really matter what other people tell you. You're kind of like, well, I know what I know, and you can think what you want, but I know what's real now.
I think the thought of, well, you're crazy is starting to go away. The perception of, well, only people who see Bigfoot are crazy, that perception's starting to go away because I've had many, many police officers on the show that have seen them. I've talked to many, many police officers off the air that have seen them. I've talked to troopers that almost hit them on the road. And so I think a lot of that perception is starting to go away the more people come out and come forward and that are brave like you, Cora, and that come forward and share their encounters and say, hey, this is what I saw. It is what it is. I don't know what to tell you, but this is what I saw. And it's amazing, too, when you start taking accounts like yours and other people's around the country, they're so consistent. That's what should blow scientists away. The descriptions are very, very, very consistent. I can have a police officer on here saying what they saw, what they experienced. I can have a cheerleader, Cora, from West Virginia, or I could have, hunters on. I could have hillbillies on. And it's just people from all walks of life. They're all seeing the exact same thing. They're all experiencing the exact same thing. If I had a nickel for every time someone said, oh, it slapped my house, I would be a multimillionaire at this point because it happens all the time. It's a very fascinating account, Cora, and I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing it.
No problem. I'm just, grateful to share and, tell people to buy some curtains for their bedroom windows.
Yeah, no kidding. Black those windows out. Yeah, it's terrifying. It's definitely a terrifying one. I'm really glad that you shared it, and I can't thank you again.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on, Cora. And I want to thank the audience again for listening tonight. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. I got a night vision camera coming, so I'm hoping to do some more filming for the audience and putting that up on the website. Until next time, everyone, have a great night. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you this evening. I have 2 guests coming up, Bob and Gina. They had 2 totally separate encounters, but very fascinating encounters. Thank you for being here tonight on a Wednesday night. I want to mention on Friday I'll be speaking with Nick, and Nick's whole family owned this vacation cabin, and they used to go out to this property, and they had several encounters over several years, and it wasn't just Nick and his family, it was their friends and people that would come visit the property, even some BFRO investigators had encounters when they were out investigating the property. And there's several BFR reports related to this property. So Nick will be coming on. He'll be sharing all the different things that happened on that property, along with his own very up-close and personal encounter with one of these creatures. So look for that on Friday. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Please be sure to include a phone number or a way for me to contact you. Again, it's Wes at SasquatchChronicles.com. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Bob to the show. Bob, thanks for being here tonight.
I appreciate you having me on.
No, I appreciate you being here. And I know you had an encounter in Ohio. And if you would, Bob, just kind of start from the beginning. It's, a lot of people, I think as they listen to this, I've had a lot of a lot of hunters that have had similar encounters to yours. But I'll let you take it away. Tell us what happened, what you experienced.
Okay, well, it was back in 2009, February of 2009. It was shortly after I had watched a Monster Quest show on the Ohio Grassman. And the episode itself I wasn't real impressed with, but they kind of showcased Salt Fork Park, and I had never been there before. Just so happens I had the weekend free, and I was single at the time, and so it was a Saturday. I loaded up my dog, and off we went to Salt Fork Park. And I live in southern Ohio, east of Cincinnati, and so it's about a 2.5 hour. I'm probably about 2.5, 3 hour drive by the time it's all said and done. And so I arrived at the park, I think it was about an hour before dark, rented a cabin. Salt Fork Park, I didn't know this at the time, but I found out it's the largest state park in Ohio. It's pretty good size. But anyway, I got there an hour before dark, got a cabin, and went and had something to eat. They have a great lodge there. Then I settled in my cabin, just my dog and I, old Willow. She's a cattle dog. Her breed is a Catahoula, but it's kind of like when people see her, a lot of people don't know what a Catahoula breed is, but she looks like a blue merle kind of cattle dog mix. But anyway, we got all settled into the cabin, and I'd have to say that I did for the first time being in an area where there's real Sasquatch reports. It was dark by the time I came back from eating dinner, and I'm thinking, wow, Sasquatch could be peeking in the windows and stuff like that. I mean, maybe not, but it was just kind of exciting having a cabin that where that possibly could happen.
It's kind of on your mind while you're there,
Yeah, I did walk around the cabin a couple of times, like in the middle of the night, and not in the middle of the night, but like an hour or so after I got there, but I didn't hear anything or nothing. The night was pretty uneventful. And then the next morning, I got some breakfast and decided to head out to explore the park a little bit. Now it had snowed a little bit. It wasn't like there was a foot of snow on the ground, but the ground was covered. A cloudy day. I went to a couple different spots, but the one place I really wanted to go to was this Hozak's Cave. It's a recess cave, and it reminds me of Hocking Hills, Ohio, which I've spent a lot of time there and camping through my youth and through my 20s and whatnot, and just been going there for years. And this cave itself at Salt Fork was very similar, a recess cave with a little waterfall on top. And I knew from exploring Hocking Hills in the winter that this probably had a nice ice stalactite formation at the top and a big stalagmite ice formation at the bottom. And I'll send you a photo of Hozak's Cave in the winter. I didn't get any photos at the time, but I researched a little bit, and there's quite a few photos. But I'll send you one so you kind of get an idea of what the opening of that cave looks like with the ice formation.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
All right, we'll do. Well, I pull in the parking lot, just my dog and I, and we're the only ones there. Of course, middle of winter, and we're at the trailhead, and we see there's a memorial there for some, I believe. I don't know if it was I think it was a girl that fell off the cave in 2003, and there was another one that fell, I believe, in 2009, just at the top of the cave and slipped and fell off because it's kind of a sandy sandstone kind of area. I think it's easy to slip and fall. But unfortunately, 2 people got killed there. But anyway, I'm at the trailhead and see this memorial. And then I walked past it, and on the show, this was before the Finding Bigfoot show and all that, which I don't really care too much for, but but on the Monster Quest show, that did show them tree knocking. So as a novelty, I went ahead and knocked a few times with a pretty good sized branch, about 2-3 inches around, and did some real good smacking knocks. And just as a novelty, I was just kind of, maybe there's a chance I might see one, or something, so.
Yeah. I don't blame you at all.
Yeah, I figured, what the heck? I mean, and so I took a few more steps. I might as well loop a couple times too, and kind of giggled at myself for doing such shit, but what the heck? Walked back the trail to the cave. Of course, there was a nice big ice formation, and the cave was real beautiful. It reminded me of what I see it like an ash cave in Hocking Hills. For anybody that's listening that's familiar with the Hocking Hills area in Ohio, they're familiar with Ash Cave. It's just a smaller version of that. So I get back there, and my dog is running around, the bottom of the cave and around the ice formation, and sniffing around, and I'm checking it out and kind of looking around, and kind of in my mind, I just was kind of getting into the natural beauty of it all, and kind of forgot that I did the tree knocks and the whoops and all that. And I would say probably 10 minutes went by. I think I sat down for a little bit, and then I decided to go ahead and head back towards the car. So I started walking out of the cave, and about the time I got to the cave's edge, because you got to figure, I'll send a picture so the audience will kind of get an idea of what I was walking out of. But as I got to the mouth of the cave, and this isn't a cave that you like a small opening you go into like a labyrinth, like a small cave. This is like a big amphitheater, like a big dome. And as I was walking to the outside edge, the only way I could describe it is that I kind of walked into a curtain of smell, of funk. And it was so strong, I could almost taste it. And at that particular second, I kind of got a chill down my back. I went, oh, whoa, because I've never smelled anything like that. And the only thing I could describe it, just like how people describe a wet dog, deer, musty, real musty, but also pungent. It was like kind of like rotted skunk. It was just a smell that it's almost hard to describe. And at that point, I took a couple steps back out of it, like back into the cave, just about 2 or 3 steps, and I didn't smell it. And then I walked back forward and walked into it again, and it was like coming into a curtain of that funk. And at that time, I kind of got the feeling that the smell was cascading down off the top of the cave, like it was just like a waterfall of smell coming down. And at that time, I sat there. I went, "Oh my God, is that the smell of this creature?" I'm thinking, here I wanted to kind of like, hey, I'm going to travel a couple hours to go see this park and maybe see Sasquatch. And at that time, I'm there by myself, with the exception of my dog, and I'm thinking, "Oh my God, I think I might be smelling this creature." I take a few more steps out, and I notice my dog's starting to act a little different. She's not like wandering off like she was, and she usually runs around with her tail up. She started to tuck her tail a little bit, and as I walked out of the cave, I was probably, 25, 30, 35 feet walking out. I didn't really want to turn around because I was afraid of what I was going to see at the top of the cave. And all of a sudden to the right of me, which is towards the creek side, I hear a clack, like as if a rock had been thrown. And my dog kind of went that direction towards where she heard it, and she started like not whimpering, but kind of making a sound, kind of like like a kind of sound, like she was concerned with something. And at that time, it scared the crap out of me, because I'm thinking, it didn't just throw a rock at me. Please tell me it just didn't throw a rock at me. I was feeling very vulnerable at that time. And I remember from listening to some of your programs how you say you better watch what you wish for because you just might get it. I was getting that sensation, and but I still didn't have enough nerve to turn around and look because I was afraid of what I might see. I went ahead and hooked Willow, my dog, to her leash, and she's still kind of like, by this time she's staying by my side and acting nervous. I took a few more steps, and I said, what the heck? I went ahead and turned around and looked up towards the top of the cave where I thought this was coming from. The rock came in the smell and didn't see anything. And a part of myself, I mean, I was relieved that I didn't see anything. And then I went ahead and turned back around and started heading back to the car. And I'm about halfway to 3/4 of the way back, and I hear this loud snap, more like a popping sound of something very loud. Probably it had to have been at least more than 2 to 3 inches around the stick or whatever it was. I mean, another chill just went down my back. I'm like, oh my God, it's like, it's snapping branches now or trees. And, I didn't start running at that point, but a part of me wanted to run. And I went ahead and took I'm heading almost to the trailhead, and I hear off in the distance to the right of me, like footsteps and crunching noises, like as if something took a couple steps. I turned to the right and I didn't see anything, but I'm going, at that point in time, I thought, my God, is there more than one? I didn't stick around. I went ahead and got back to the parking lot, loaded old Willow up in the car, drove out of there. But a part of me was relieved to get to the car and to be on my way. I mean, it's just funny to listen to some of your stories, and you say some of these people, they want to see it, but I have to say, you better watch what you wish for, because I felt very vulnerable at that time. And I'm used to the outdoors. I'm an outdoorsy kind of person. I lived in Minnesota for 12 years. I've been to the Boundary Waters, and I've camped outside. I've even took my small fishing boat out on these islands and camped out on these islands in Minnesota. And I never had a feeling of you like that hair raising up on the back of your neck and fear like I had leaving that cave.
The smell you mentioned, that curtain of smell, I've talked to a lot of people who they describe it that way. It's like you walk into a wall of stink. And a lot of the guys I've talked to, and gals, that have smelled that, they'll say that it's so bad you almost want to gag. It's just so putrid. Yeah. It's just a rotten, wet dog, all the worst smells in the world, throw them all in one, and that's what you got. And I used to ask people, like a skunk, and they would say, no, worse than a skunk. It is,
and really the hair is coming up on my arms right now just because it's like I'm kind of remembering that smell. And you're absolutely right. It's almost indescribable because I'm familiar with the smells of the farm and the smells of like dead animals in the woods and rotted trash and everything. But you could say it was a combination of all that, but there was also a hint of something that was different. It's altogether different. No, I've never smelled anything like it in my life.
Yeah, it's one of those things to where you hit it right on the head. I've heard a lot of people when they are describing it, they'll say that certain phrase that you said. They'll say you can almost taste it. I can almost taste it. It was so bad.
Yeah. When
they walk into it, and it makes you wonder why these creatures give off that smell. If it's a fear, I know a lot of guys will say, well, it's
could have been territorial, maybe. Maybe the wood knots brought the curiosity. I did contact Don Keaton, who was on that Monster Quest show, and I think he's an investigator of Sasquatch. And I sent him an email, and he sent one back saying that the wood knocks probably brought the curiosity of the creature to the cave. And what was so weird about it is how I was there to maybe see Sasquatch, and I was all excited about it and all that. But after I wood knocked, and 10 or 15 minutes passed, and I was already in the cave, and I'm checking out this cool ice formation. It kind of left my mind that I kind of sounds strange, but I kind of forgot about Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I was just kind of enjoying the natural surroundings and the beauty. And to walk into that curtain of smell, it just like it hit me like a ton of bricks of how I went, oh my God, and I. It's just, better watch what you wish for, because it wasn't like there was a parking lot full of people. I was there by myself. I mean, I to say, well, did you, you can ask, well, did you feel like you were in danger? I'd say a part of it. Yeah, I kind of felt like I was, because I was alone. My dog, she's not like a great, big, huge dog. She's just a small frame dog. I'm sure she would try to protect me, but from what I hear, the size of these creatures, it'd be no match. We've both been on the menu probably.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think Don's probably right. The wood knocking might have brought him in. It might have been curious, and there probably wasn't a whole lot of people out because it was so cold. I could be wrong.
Exactly.
It's Ohio, but
no, it was unusually cold. Yeah, and there was snow on the ground, and there wasn't strong winds, but it just wasn't a time where there was a lot of visitors at the park. I mean, and I was there a little earlier. I said noon, but it might have been 10 or 11. I just didn't see a lot of people out moving around. I mean, I did see occasional cars in here and there, but I didn't pull into the parking lot and see 3 or 4 cars. I mean, I was there by myself, and that didn't bother me. At first when I walked in, I got to the trailhead. I'm like, I'll wood knock a few times. And this was before, like I said, the Finding Bigfoot. This was just on the Monster Quest show, the Grassman. They showed him wood knocking and whooping. So I thought, well, I'll just try it. And didn't think much more of it. I kind of thought, well, that's fun, but I probably won't see it, and I didn't actually see it, but when that rock got tossed, I thought, oh my God, no way. Is it throwing something at me?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to turn around at that point. If I would have turned around and saw a huge hairy beast like staring down and growling at me, I don't know what I would have done, Wes. I mean, I probably would have just had a heart attack and crap myself. But I didn't see the creature, but I felt that it was above me. At least that one was above me, above the cave. And I'll be sure to send you some pictures of it so you can get an idea of the setting, and the audience could too.
Yeah, no, I'd like that. Yeah, no, I'd like that. The other thing I was thinking of is a rock throwing. It may not have necessarily was trying to hit you with a rock. It might have been trying to get your attention over that way so it could back out from the cave. I wanted to ask you, how was your dog acting all the way back to the truck? How was your dog reacting?
Well, she was just really antsy and staying close to me. And she's not usually like that. She's just the type that, she will come when she's called, but she likes, at that time, she was only a year old, and she would like to wander out of my eyesight. But at that point in time when the smell came about and the rock throwing and the popping sound, she was pretty close to me, and I could see her shiver a few times with her tail tucked. She was looking around. She was picking up on my energy as well, I think, being nervous. But I think she was sensing something as well. She was acting very out of character. I think she was probably just as concerned and scared as I was. And I didn't really think that I was going to get that kind of, have that kind of experience. And I'm not really one who sees faces in clouds and just a real creative imagination. I'm kind of like, well, I would, you got to see it to believe it kind of thing, But I tell you what, that smell convinced me that it probably was something, because I had never smelled anything like that in my entire life, and it's just indescribable. You can't really describe the smell. I hear people in some of their reports describing it, and I'm going, yeah, but yet you can't really put a distinct definition of how it smells. There's something to it that's different, and it could be just that it's releasing it from maybe a territorial or aggression. I don't know. Like you said, that I never really thought about that, but that rock throwing could have been a diversion, so it could have backed off. I did get the feeling that there could have been more than one when I heard the stepping. It was off in the distance, though. It wasn't really close. I would say it was probably at least 50, probably maybe 75 yards out, where I heard the stepping, but it might have been deer, possibly. But at that point in time, I was thinking that I wasn't thinking there could have been more than one until I heard that noise. And then at that point in time, I thought, okay, it's time to get back to the car. Come on, Willow, let's go.
I don't blame you.
And
I really don't blame you. I think I probably would have left that, taken that as time to go. Do you ever go back to the area?
No, I haven't been back. I've been talking to my fiance about going, and she's been to the park numerous times. She lived in Columbus, which isn't too far from it. Probably, I don't know, 45 minutes or so. So she's been to the park numerous times and rented cabins and stuff, but she wasn't into Sasquatch. She loves the show, and I kind of got her addicted to the show now. And she says she's going to have to quit listening to these stories because she gets all spooked and wants to draw the curtains. And we do have 150 acres behind us of woods, but there's little to no reports of anything around here. But yeah, we're planning on going in the future. And I said, let's rent a cabin. Let's go back to Hosey's Cave. But I would feel better. I would have felt better if I had somebody with me, or more people, if there was more people around. It was just the fact when I smelled the smell and the rocks and the sound of something snapping and the sound of something off in the distance to the right of me as I'm walking out, I just felt vulnerable. I felt like it wasn't like I was on the menu, but I felt that
you're on high alert at that point. I mean,
exactly,
your spidey senses are going off, and you're very aware of what's going on. No, I get it, and I've been there before. I've been there more times than I'd like to say, but yeah, where you just get that. I mean, you're on high alert. You're very much aware of what's going on around you, and like you said, I mean, it could have been a deer. Probably, I tend to probably not. I didn't hear it, but it's hard to say. But when you're in that moment, every little pop or you hear anything, it's just It's interesting too that from when you were in the cave to where you got to your truck, or almost to your truck, it's almost like you were scooted out of the area. They were kind of watching you, getting you out of that area.
Exactly. That's the kind of feeling I was getting too. I mean, it was just, at first I was like, oh my gosh, there might be one there. And the smell, but I got the kind of the same feeling. It wasn't, I didn't hear any screams. I didn't see, they weren't shaking trees and all that, but I did get the feeling I was getting ushered out of there.
Yeah, you probably were. You probably were.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, thank you for listening. Thank you, and your fiance, thank her for listening. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing it. Like I said, a lot of people have this type of encounter, and there's really no explanation for it. It's not something they saw, but with the smell and all the other things going on, I think it probably was a Sasquatch, if not two.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, thanks for having me on. We very much enjoy the show, and like I said, I'll send you some pictures of the cave. Also, I came across some reports of other sightings back at Hosey's Cave. After I had my experience, I'm like, and also on the show Monster Quest, they were talking. I think they mentioned that there was some sightings back there, but I'll see if I can connect to some of those links and send them to you. But I'll definitely send you some pictures. So,
no, I appreciate it, man, very much.
Oh, no problem. All right, my pleasure. I appreciate it, and thanks for having me on the show, Wes.
Oh, thank you, Bob.
All right, buddy. Thanks.
Next up, we'll be speaking with Gina, who had a very terrifying encounter when she was a little girl, and she was with her brother, and they had a very up-close and personal encounter with the creature. I'm sure one that she won't forget anytime soon. Gina, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me tonight.
And if you would, you had a very terrifying encounter when you were young, a very scary encounter. But if you would kind of start from the beginning, tell us what you guys were out doing. Just walk the audience into the whole story of what happened.
Okay. It was in the spring, summer of 1967 or 1968. At the time, I was 7 or 8 years old, and my brother was 2 years older than me. And we were in the woods next to our home we lived right along the Mississippi River in Illinois. And at the time, we went to the woods to play in the slough, or most people might not know what that is. It's a small body of water, not like a pond, but smaller. And we were in there playing with tadpoles, little frogs, not quite developed. And we were both bent over, sloshing around the water, playing with these little tadpoles. And we'd been there for quite a while. And, of course, we were making a lot of noise with the water. And the water, of course, being it's a stagnant type pool of water with no fresh water in it, it smelled. So I didn't smell anything. I didn't hear anything. And all of a sudden I looked over actually at my brother. I didn't look up. I looked over. And there I saw something beside him. And it was two long, hairy white arms. Of course, I looked up, and all I saw was a white figure with a lot of hair and these very, very long arms getting ready to grab my brother. Or it appeared that it should be, both arms were, like I said, beside my brother. It appeared it was getting ready to grab him. And, of course, I froze when I saw it. I really didn't, I had no idea what it could be, but I froze, and then I screamed at my brother. And when I did, I alerted him. He looked up, saw this thing, and started screaming. And as we screamed, this thing let out a very high pitch, it's hard to describe, but like a very loud, very high-pitched scream. So when we saw it, we both took off running as fast as we could. We didn't stop. We didn't slow down to see if it was coming behind us. And we ran home, and at home my brothers were there and my parents. And, of course, my brothers knew that there was something wrong because we were both so scared. And we told them, we saw a monster. There's a white monster in the woods. And, of course, they ran out. We stayed home because we were so scared. And they went out to the area that we told them it was at, and they could find nothing. Of course, we had no idea what it was, so we just know it was very big, very tall, very long arms, white, long white hair. But I couldn't tell you what it was. And at the time, I'd never heard of a Sasquatch. I was young, never been around anyone who ever talked about a Sasquatch. The only thing we did hear, and this is a couple of years later, was a mention of a Bigfoot. But we always called it Momo the Monster. And I don't know if that was something maybe one of my brothers had heard. It referred to that there was a Momo somewhere, they'd heard about. But we always called it our Momo the Monster. And basically that's what happened that day.
It's a scary encounter. The creature itself, as you describe it, standing over your brother, looking to grab him, how long would you say the hair was on the creature's body? Or do you remember?
It was very long. I would guess probably at least 4 inches long. Very long hair. The arms were what was amazing to me, was the length of them. I mean, if I would say it would have been human and not whatever it was, the arms if it would come to the kneecaps on a human, the arms would have probably came between the knee and the foot. They were that long. That was what caught my attention more than anything about it, was the arms and, of course, the white hair all over, which I would estimate that hair to be at least 4 inches long all over.
Did the creature have paws or did it have hands?
It looked to be, I'll tell you what I remember, I think it looked to have like gorilla type or monkey type hands. Sort of like you'd see a gorilla in the zoo. It had fingers. It didn't have a paw, like you're saying, like a dog paw or a cat paw. It was fingers of some sort.
When you went back to tell your family, what was the general impression you got from your family after you told them what you guys had seen?
Oh, they knew immediately that we had seen something to put us in that much of a fright. They knew we were not making it up. My family never once doubted that we did see something. They never said, "Oh, you're crazy." They never said, "You're making this up." They knew. They could feel and see the fear in us, and we were crying and screaming. They had no doubt, never once questioned that we saw something. Now, not so much with the general public. We were told not to talk about it. Of course, we were in a small community, newly into the small community within a couple of years. And, my parents said, don't talk about this. Of course, people were going to think you're crazy. And so we never talked to people, but as I got older, and if I'd mentioned anything that I had seen something that was not ordinary, people would, you're crazy. But my family they never ever doubted we saw something.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially coming back screaming like you guys were. And you generally know right off the bat if kids have seen something, and it just doesn't add up to being a bear. It doesn't add up to really being anything else besides a Sasquatch with your descriptions. I think it's interesting, as you and I talked yesterday, people that are in very intense situations, people that are in very scary situations, they tend to focus on one thing. Sometimes they have a hard time describing the Momo monster. Actually, most descriptions of it, you don't really get facial descriptions because people will say it had hair on all over its face, and so I didn't really see the face. What's interesting is in very high intense situations, after all the witnesses I've talked to, one thing I've noticed is they'll focus in on something. It's like I was telling you about the guy that shot one. He was so focused on the nostrils. I mean, he could give me every detail about the nostrils, and this thing was on top of him, and he shot it. He could give me a general description of the face, but he really wanted to talk about the nostrils. Or you'll talk to a lot of witnesses where they'll describe the shoulders, and they'll tell you everything about the shoulders. The shoulders are just huge. This thing was just huge. And that's what and in your situation, you're focusing in on the arms.
Yeah.
Do you think it was going to grab your brother?
I really do. I had talked to a guy who was supposed to be researching these a couple of years ago, and when I told him what happened, he had told me that they were nonviolent, non-aggressive. But I have come to believe that they are aggressive. And yesterday after we talked, I was really more shaken up probably yesterday than I was at the time of the incident, realizing that people were getting, aggressive action from these. That I wonder what now, where I would be, or my brother would be, had I not looked up at the moment I did. Would they have attacked us and my parents never see us again, or my family? That scared me yesterday. Not so much back 47 years ago, as much as yesterday, realizing that I was probably very close to being attacked. Because young, naive, I was 7 or 8, really didn't know anything about these things. But yes, at the time when I seen it, I thought it was going to grab my brother. So, yes, I'm, right now looking back, this is like a vivid memory that I think it never will go away. I don't think I will ever forget what I saw that day, ever. And it's as vivid right now in my mind as when it happened. And thinking about it, yes, I'm going to say he probably had every intention of grabbing my brother. Or he, she, whatever, I don't know what it was.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think that's probably what the intention was, and you startled it the moment you screamed. I hear a lot of witnesses say, too, I screamed, and then it screamed, and then we kind of ran the opposite directions. But, it's what bothers me about your encounter is the fact that you guys were little kids, and you hear, I was telling you about the 411 case where the little boy was taken. And when he was taken, he just vanished. He just completely vanished. And some people down a couple miles from where the boy was taken had described seeing a bear running on 2 legs carrying what appeared to be a child over its shoulder. And they were just kind of blown off by the whole thing. They just, the investigators didn't really want to look into that. It really makes you wonder how much of this goes on of kids vanishing, people vanishing, never to be heard from again. No one ever knows what happens to them.
Yeah, it makes you question it, wonder what, could it have been?
I think that they can be very dangerous. I think that they can be very extraterritorial, and I think people do come up missing. And, that it bugs me when I hear researchers say, well, they're harmless, because, I can give you 150 different witnesses that will tell you opposite of what you just said about them being harmless, because that's not true.
Yeah.
They can be put in bad situations, and these things can be vicious when they want to be. What's your brother think of the whole thing? I would imagine you and him still talk about this.
Not much. Once in a while. He lives about 400 miles from me, 350. We don't talk much about it, and actually after it happened, we talked a little bit, but for years we didn't bring it up. Probably for the first couple of years we joke about it or whatever. Not that it was a joking matter. It wasn't. We were kids. It happened. It was scary. But as we got older, we rarely ever mentioned it. I think the biggest reason we didn't was because if anybody had heard us ever joke about it or anything, they would say, you're crazy. You're just nuts. And actually, I can recall when I was older and I had my children and one of my daughters was married, and we had mentioned this in front of one of her husbands. And he kind of looked at me and smiled, and he made some kind of comment like, you're crazy, aren't you? But I think the part of the country I'm at, the general population will never believe what I've seen. Without a first-hand witness of actually going through what I went through, I don't believe they'll ever believe it. But, I think it's probably because of where I live in open farmland in the Midwest. It's not like it's a heavily forested area. Maybe that's why, but no, and I think, like you said, that's one of the reasons why my brother and I didn't talk about it much. I guess the fear of being overheard or, just questioned about it. So.
Well, there was an interesting thing where a farmer saw a white one not long after your encounter. Do you mind telling the audience about that?
Yes. My mother had heard about it and told us that a farmer was out working his field, and he had encountered this in his field and got off of this tractor or ran to his house and got his gun. By the time he got back, it was gone. But when it happened, and my mother told me about it, it was like a validation to me. I needed that to be validated that this thing did exist. It was real. Someone has seen this besides us. I think I needed that. I mean, not that I thought I was crazy whatsoever. I mean, totally sane, knew I saw it, knew what I saw. But when you're the only one who came forth and said anything or, no one talks about it, you really need somebody to validate that this thing does exist. I'm not the only one who's seen it, But I don't know if anyone else in the area besides that farmer has seen it. But kind of to me, it was a good feeling to know that someone besides me and my brother actually witnessed that this thing was roaming around.
Well, and it's like I was telling you yesterday, sometimes in these smaller communities, I'm convinced some of the best stories you've never heard come from Alaska, Texas, Mississippi, Oklahoma, these areas. And the reason why you never hear them is in these smaller communities, they're pretty tight-lipped about it, amazingly enough. They're very, very tight-lipped, and a lot of times these people don't come out and tell you anything. It's kind of like I was telling you, and I've told this story before, but with the hunter, and I said, well, have you ever seen anything strange in the woods? And he said, what, like Sasquatch? And I said, yeah, like that. And he just kind of laughed me off, and I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, okay. I thought I'd ask, and I start walking away, and he said, whoa, there was this one time, and I knew it was coming. And I think a lot of these people, they just don't want to be... They don't want to be...
about their sanity.
Right.
They don't want to be exposed as... They don't want to be the subject of somebody saying, oh, you've got to be crazy. I understand. I totally understand that. That's why for years, outside of my family and my own children after I had them, I didn't go about telling people this. I mean, honestly, people would have thought I've lost my mind. So no, I can understand why people are tight-lipped, because you don't want to be looked at like, there's something wrong with that person. You can't validate it. you can't make people understand it unless they've seen it and witnessed it. So to me, it's about like somebody claiming to see an alien. You know, how many people are going to believe that? They're not. The general population is not going to believe that. And so to a lot of people, I think Sasquatch, they correlate it with something about like an alien, like this thing doesn't exist, but it does exist. You know, I really believe it does exist. If that's what I saw, whether it was a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, whatever they want to call it, a Momo, whatever it is, it exists.
They definitely do exist, and a lot of people run into them. And it's frustrating, too, when the general public has that mentality of, oh, come on, you know. It's like, well, you know, it's like with my show. Do you want to hear a judge's encounter, or do you want to hear a doctor's encounter? Would you like to hear, you know, a police officer's encounter? Would you like to hear, I mean, are you going to take their testimony any more than a hunter, any more than a bunch of kids playing? It's sure funny how everyone tells the same. Generally speaking, there's so many correlations between what someone says, like in Washington State, in Texas, on the East Coast, in the Midwest. They're all the same. You know, there's small little tiny differences in, you know, details. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, they're describing the exact same creature. None of these people know each other. And so I just hope at one point this whole topic gets blown open and people won't think someone's crazy who wants to come forward, you know, that someone like yourself where, you know, why would a bunch of little kids make up this story? You know, and the arm length you're talking about and the color, and white isn't uncommon. It's not as prevalent as like auburn, like you and I talked about, or black or brown, but white is common. People do see white ones.
Yeah, when you talk about that white, that's what threw me off. When I finally heard about Sasquatch and you started, you know, seeing things about that on TV or whatever, the reason I was, like, confused was this thing was totally white, and what I'm hearing about is brown, you know, brown, dark brown Sasquatch. That's why I couldn't have told you back then it was a Sasquatch. Of course, I hadn't heard of it. Even years later, whenever I did hear stories about Sasquatch, I never put it together that's what it was because of the color, but I knew it was some kind of a hairy beast, you know, something very abnormal. So, yeah, the color, that's what threw me.
Did it ever affect you or your brother as far as going back out there?
Yes. Oh, yes. I was a huge tomboy. I was in the woods almost especially in the summertime when we were out of school. I was in the woods all the time with my dog. And that's what I did. I'd get up and go play in the woods. After that encounter, that was it. I was done. I never went back to the woods alone. And even as an adult, I did hunt with my husband when I was older and married. He was a deer hunter and squirrel and rabbit hunter. So, yes, we went to the woods, but we always had a gun. I will never enter the woods alone ever again, especially not with a weapon to defend myself. I think it traumatized me for life. It scares me, and very little really scares me, but that scares me because it's non-human, for one. In our area, in the Midwest, in Illinois, we have no bear. We have nothing of that stature, nothing of that size. The biggest you're going to find is a deer. That was no deer, believe me, no deer. So in the area it happened, there's nothing that they can, that I can say, oh, it must have been this, it must have been that. No, there's nothing I can compare the size to or anything. And the fact of standing on legs, even if we had bear in this community, in this area, which we don't, there is no bear that size. There's just no bear that size that I've seen. And standing up the way it was, so.
And bears generally don't have hands and long arms like that.
No. So it could never be misconstrued as no one's going to say, oh, you saw a bear. No, I did not see a bear,
It's a very interesting encounter, and I want to give a shout out. I know you I don't know if you want me to mention this or not, but you do online gaming, and a bunch of kids online told you about the show. So if they're listening, I want to thank them for
for Yes, it was a young man in southern Illinois who we were gaming on a World of Warcraft game, and we started talking about. He had actually told me he wanted to build a small home. We were talking about small home living, and he told me, he goes, "I want to move to the Washington, Oregon area." And then he said something about Bigfoot in his sentence, and I looked at that sentence, and I didn't think nothing more about it. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he says to me, he goes, "What do you think about Bigfoot?" And I said, "You mean the Bigfoot?" And he goes, "Yeah." And then I said, "Would you, believe me if I told you I have actually encountered something of that nature?" He goes, "Oh," he got all excited because he himself had an encounter where he was in the woods, late at night with no flashlight, alone. He was waiting to be picked up by his father in a boat, I think he told me. But anyway, he had heard all these sounds in the night, like something stomping towards him and then breathing very heavy. And I think that's what opened him up to your show, your podcast. And he turned me on to your podcast. I'd never heard of you before. And so he says, "You have to listen to this." And so I did, and it was like, my hair was the back of my hair was standing up on my neck, because I was like, wow, listen to these encounters that you were interviewing people. It was scary, and but yeah, this young kid, 22, he's the one that turned me on to your show, but it was hard for me to even believe that somebody would ask me that, because, as I said, around here, nobody would ever speak of that in public, ever. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, well, I want to thank him for that. And, if nothing else that I do, I hope it changes people's opinion. People who have not had an encounter, I hope the show changes their opinion to maybe, at the very least, stop and go, you know what, this person saw something. I may not believe in Sasquatch, I may not believe, but you know what, this person saw something. I don't know what they saw, but they saw something. And I hope the show changes people's opinion on these creatures. For the longest time, there's been so much of, well, like the researcher you talked to, there's been so much of these things are harmless, and that's not really true. I would say most encounters really are not happy encounters. They're not the friendly forest giants people play them off to be. Most encounters are very aggressive, and can be potentially violent encounters with these things, because they are unpredictable. It's like I posted to the blog about this chimp attacking these kids, these two little boys playing down by the river. And what's interesting about that is you talk to some people, and they'll tell you, well, chimps are harmless. They're just cute little harmless creatures. Well, that's not really true. Chimps are very, very, very vicious, and can attack you, and are very unpredictable when they attack you. You can startle one off, but you may not startle one off. They may attack you in the meantime. So I think it correlates pretty much with Sasquatch and what Sasquatch does. And I'm just glad, going back in time, that moment you looked up and screamed.
Oh yeah, I now wonder what would have happened had I not seen it, and at that exact moment as he was getting ready to grab my brother. And I'm sure at the time, asked by my older brothers, what was it doing? I said it was getting ready to grab him, and then, of course, whenever I talked to this guy who researches them a couple of years, he says, but they're not aggressive. Then it made me question, then what was it doing? Why was it standing there with his arms getting ready to grab my brother? I don't even know how my brother missed its breath. It was right to the back of him. It was standing right over him. And I believe now, after listening to other people talk about their experiences, which I've never had the opportunity to do before I started listening to your podcast, that it was possibly exactly what it was going to do, grab him at least. Because I was under the false impression that all those things aren't aggressive.
Usually your first gut feeling on what they're trying to do is usually right. It's usually your gut feeling on what the intention is usually right. And so I tend to agree with you. I think in this situation, I think it probably was going to grab your brother. I think you startled it, scared it, might have confused it at the moment. It screamed, and so it ran off. It seems a little bit more than just simple curiosity. for it to be having its arms. You know, if it was just looking at you guys through the bushes and just sitting there watching you guys, I might be more apt to say, well, it was probably just curious. But if it's...
No, it wasn't. It was within inches of my brother's back. It was within feet of me, like maybe 5 foot. The little pond, the little slough we were playing in was 5 foot across maybe. It was within inches. It was standing directly behind my brother with its arms to the side of my brother. So, no, it wasn't observing. It was right there, you know.
It was looking to take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's scary to think about now.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing the encounter on the show, Gina. I really can't. It's a very, very interesting encounter and kind of an eye-opener. You know, I always tell people when they go out with their kids, I know a lot of kids want to go out looking for Bigfoot, and I'm okay. You know, with that, it's...
Oh, no.
With that, though, you know, I always tell people, keep an eye, very, very close eye on your kids, because you just never know what these things are going to do. You know, and even a lot of the Native Americans will tell you, when you're out in the woods, keep an eye on your kids, keep an eye on your women, keep an eye on, you know, because these things will snag them if they get a chance.
Yes. Just to interrupt you 1 minute, if I'm a parent, I would advise, you know, you're talking about parents, their kids want to go out and see this thing. As a kid who did see it, the frightening experience, it stays with you forever. I wouldn't advise taking a child out to even try to get a glimpse of one. I think it will change them for life. They'll never forget it. And like my experience was so terrifying. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever been through in all of my 55 years. And I wouldn't want a child of mine or a grandchild of mine to see what I saw, because they're going to be scared. They're going to be scared of a lot of things, and they're going to question a lot of things, and they're going to believe that there's a possibility of anything being out there. If they actually see what I saw, they're going to be more open to the possibilities of anything that could exist in this world, because at 5 years, you know, like I said, it was 7, 8 years old is what I was. And if a child of that size sees that, I think they're going to be traumatized for life. I know I have been, so I don't know that I would take a child out there. You know, I guess that's the parent's discretion, that as a child who experienced it, I wouldn't want to see it again.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you. I know there was just one kid I can think of as you were just sitting there talking. He was really into the show. He listened to the show all the time. He's a 14-year-old kid here in Washington State, and he just loved the show and always wanted to go out and look for Bigfoot. Well, one day he got his wish granted, and he was playing with his friends, and he saw it. It was him and his friend ended up taking off running, and the kid refused to come on the show, and that was okay with me. I understand he is, you know, you got to be careful sometimes with kids, but the dad came on, and the dad said his son's been traumatized. He refuses to go in the woods anymore. He told his dad it wasn't like he thought it was going to be. It scared him to death. And he never wants to look for this thing again. He never wants to watch Finding Bigfoot again. He never wants to. So you're right. It does traumatize people.
It does. Mm-hmm.
You know, and it does scare a lot of people, you know, when you run into this, because it's one comment you made yesterday that really stuck with me, Gina. You said, once you see something like this, it's hard to come down on people who say, I saw an alien, or I saw an alien ship, or I saw, you know, something we would look at as crazy, or most people would look at as crazy. Mm-hmm. Well, when you see a non-human primate running around the woods that supposedly doesn't exist, what else exists in this world? You know, what else is out there that, you know, people who say this happened to me and we call them crazy, well, maybe they're not so crazy. Maybe there is something going on here with some of these other things outside of Bigfoot. You know, it kind of opens your mind a little bit to the possibilities of other things existing.
Yes, it did. It opened my mind up that there's probably anything possible, because, what you just said, if somebody came up to me and said they saw an alien or a spaceship, I'm probably not going to say you're crazy. I'm probably going to think they probably saw something, you know. But it's a possibility, you know, because mine seems far-fetched to most people to grasp. You know, they're going to say, oh, that's crazy. That didn't happen, whatever. So I'm not going to deny when somebody says something. I'm not going to say, oh, you're just crazy, because I've been called crazy for something I know for sure that I've seen. So I think, like you said, there's a possibility anything can exist after what I've seen. I know there's a possibility.
I tend to agree with you on that. I definitely tend to agree with you on that. Thank you again for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad you had me. I just hope more people will come forward and tell what happened to them, tell what they've seen, not be scared. I was scared for years to mention it,
Yeah,
fear, yeah.
Yeah, like you said, though, it's becoming more and more known. It's becoming more and more accepted. And there's a younger generation out there, like the kids you were online gaming with, that are more open to it. They're more open to go, hey, you know what, maybe this person's not lying. Maybe this person's telling the truth. And that's what I hope the show does. I hope it encourages more people to have the courage, like you did, Gina, to come forward.
Yeah, I hope so, too, because it actually helps to talk about it. After talking to you yesterday, you're the first person, honestly, who can say, outside of my family, that hasn't talked to me like I'm probably crazy. I felt like I got a lot off my chest just talking to you, being able to open up about what happened that day. So it felt good, to not be questioned about what I seen and doubted.
I appreciate that very much. I appreciate the compliment. And like I said, a lot of witnesses, it really, you're not crazy. You're really not crazy. I can tell you that. I believe what you saw. There's little details, especially, even being a young age that you recount that I hear from adults, little things that you mentioned. I really think a Sasquatch was on the edge of grabbing your brother. And I think that you probably won't even admit this today, but I think you probably saved his life by screaming unintentionally.
Both of our lives. After realizing how aggressive they could be, probably both of our lives. Of course, at the time, I was in fear of my life anyways from what I saw. This thing standing over him. Of course, we were both in fear. We were both scared to death. So, yeah, maybe saved both of our lives in the end.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Gina. And remember, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. I will see everyone back here on Friday night. Have a great night, everyone.